premise is wrong. Jesus said, don't imagine I came to abolish the law of Moses. I came not to abolish it, but to fulfill it, to bring it to its intended highest meaning. There are samples of that, as we well know. Jesus abrogated a reason for divorce. It doesn't matter what it was exactly. It's over and done with in Deuteronomy 24, 24, isn't it? Deuteronomy 24. There's a law that Moses allowed them, for the hardness of our heart, divorce for whatever reason that was, provided they gave a certificate of divorce. But Jesus said, I'm not permitting that. Moses allowed it, but I, Jesus, am telling you something else. That should prove to any open-minded person who understands English that Jesus is not copying the law in the letter. On another occasion, they said, why don't we stone this lady caught in adultery? Jesus said, don't do it. Well, Jesus was contravening the law of Moses there, because Moses had said you're supposed to stone adulterers. So this isn't very difficult. Think of the virgin birth story in Isaiah 7. There was a young lady there who had a child. It wasn't a literal virginal begetting, almost certainly not. But when you come to Matthew, Matthew says, now what happened in the case of Mary, who literally did not have a husband? That is a literal virginal begetting. You see what's happened there? The prophecy has become fuller than it originally was. The law of Moses now becomes fuller than it originally was. It's taken on new life. Oh, think of this wonderful example, the wine that came out of the water. You see, the water is a rather dead, uninteresting thing. But Jesus said, let's turn that water into wine. That was a physical miracle, wasn't it? Water is physical, so is wine. But it's the new wine in the new wine bottles. The whole of the new covenant. You kill it. You cause it to die if you don't get this right. If you're going to insist on keeping the law of Moses in the letter, you're simply saying, I don't believe in the new covenant. So what Jesus has done in 5 blocks of teaching, very clearly marked by when Jesus had finished all these sayings 5 times over, he's the new Moses, bringing that old covenant to an end and giving it a new, living, exciting, heart-throbbing meaning. That's wonderful. So all the words of Jesus then are in Matthew, then there's 5 blocks, also in Mark, also in Luke, also in John. And then when Jesus dies, he says, I'm now going to ratify, bring into force officially, that wonderful new covenant by shedding my blood. You can't give more than your life. And he sheds his blood to bring into full force the covenant that he'd been teaching for those 3.5 years during his ministry. That is very beautiful. So it's a falsehood to say that Jesus kept the law of Moses, as our questioner rightly spotted. Then we'd have to be keeping the law of Moses, the Sabbath, the holy days, the food laws, and so on. That's impossible. What I'm suggesting here will bring you closer to Jesus. You should be following the teachings of Messiah, the new covenant, amplified even further by Paul. Jesus didn't give the whole thing. He said there are certain things I can't give you now. It might be too much for you. But gradually this new covenant comes into being. The words are ratified at the cross and developed further by Paul, so radical that physical circumcision for religious reasons is forbidden in Galatians. People simply couldn't get their heads around the discussion we're having now. Galatians was an impassioned effort to get people to see that the old covenant is not the same as the new. Physical circumcision and keeping the food laws, observing the Sabbath, holy days, and new moons, that's what you don't want to do. You're forbidden to do that. To circumcise your male child for reasons of religion. I'm not talking about medical reasons. That's a totally other matter. You can do what you like there. But to insist on keeping the law of Moses in the letter is shaking your fist at Jesus. Don't do it. So you must discern between the true law of life, the commandments of God, all the basic commands, we know about them. But you must insist equally on not going back under the shadow of the old covenant in the letter. That is fatal to your Christian life.
So just a follow on that, if Jesus was not a Torah observant Jew,
right?
How do you explain this passage here, Matthew 23?
Well, that's a sufficient instruction for that particular moment. But to say that that's the end of the story is to contradict the rest of the New Testament, unfortunately. So they should submit themselves to the Pharisees, do what they do. Are you going to insist on tithing then all the vegetables and all of that? I think not. So in some way, Jesus is conceding to that temporary arrangement. If you use this as your ultimate text, then you'd have to do all the tithing, 3 tithes. You'd have to do your tithe on the mint and the cumin and the rest of it. That evidently is not what the New Testament intends.